Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got whizzing around in front of me today is one of the new plastic Gurkhas from Warlord Games, as they would have appeared during the campaign against the Imperial Japanese Army, likely in Burma, the way that I've painted this fella, and we're going to talk about the uniforms very briefly at the start here. Now this is actually quite a simple method, and I'm going to show you sort of a halfway finished job as we get to the end there, and then how to take it a little bit further so you've got something like this. Now all of the paints will be listed in the description below, same as always, so let's get started. Now before we jump straight into the painting, I do want to do a quick little summary on the uniforms of the period, which you might find useful if you've not sort of jumped in on this before, or if you just want a quick refresher. Now there are timestamps, you can jump straight to the painting if you'd like, but you may find this interesting. So, British uniform, British and Commonwealth uniform of the period broadly falls into two categories. The Woodland battle dress, which is that slightly brown, slightly greenish uniform where arguments start about how green it should be. It was manufactured in a few very slightly different styles. New Zealand battle dress had more buttons, for example. Canadian battle dress was a little bit more green, but broadly, battle dress was the brown woolen stuff. And then you had the khaki drill, or KD. Now, KD was manufactured normally in cotton and is what we tend to think of as the desert uniform. It's that pale, sort of khaki color, and the idea is that it was more suitable for hotter climates. So, like I said, desert uniform, and initially it was what was issued to those troops who were being sent off to fight the Imperial Japanese Army in Burma and the like. Now, you may see straight away there's a walloping great problem with this wonderful light uniform being worn in the jungles. So what happened is very, very quickly, troops began dyeing their uniforms green in the field. Now, it didn't take long at all before this stuff that was being manufactured mostly in India was being dyed green at the factory as well. So, yeah, if you've come across any discussion about what dyeing and color-fast materials and what have you of the 40s were like, you've got a lot of options for how to paint a dyed green khaki drill. Now, the same is true is going to be of the jungle greens that we'll talk a little bit about as we're painting them, but in short, any light green will do the job here. Once it gets wet, once it gets sweaty, once it gets sun-bleached, the differences in appearance are going to be quite dramatic across 2 or 3 different guys in the same platoon. So if you haven't got the perfect green, don't worry about it. So to start off with, I've primed my fella here. This is Necrotic flesh. It is a pretty much perfect color for that dyed, faded khaki drill. Like I said, it can get you can get quite deep in the weeds with this one. I'm going to use here, this is Woodland Camo on his trousers. And the idea here is that this is probably, because there is a matte pocket on the side here, rather than being dyed KD, I'm pretty certain these would have been the manufactured jungle greens. So a darker green is going to be more suitable, I would say. You could use army green here. And indeed, if you wanted to really quickly paint these guys, you could just prime them in army green and do them all one color, which would also be pretty accurate. All the same, what I'm using, Woodland Camo, and we'll go over his trousers. Anywhere it needs a second coat, I'll just thin down my paint a bit more and give it one of those. Now, as long as you're picking any vaguely army man green there, you should be fine. And the same color will also work for his shirt. You could also pick a different green entirely. Doesn't need to match. Now what I'm going to use here, this is Ruddy Umber, and we'll start painting in his skin. This is technically one of the reddish browns, and it's going to work quite well, I think, for giving us that warmer skin tone of the Gurkhas. Now obviously this is one where it gets a little tricky because I'm trying to color match photos that I've seen, but still account for the fact that this guy is only an inch tall. So it gets a little bit tricky trying to get that perfect skin tone. But this is what I'm going to try. If you do have a suggestion or something that you've used before, I would really be curious to hear it. Now, when painting the hats, these would also have been dyed in some instances or manufactured in green, but early on they were also in standard sort of battle dress colors. So what I'm going to use here is to start off the hatband, I am using light battle dress from the historical range. If you do find these a little tricky to get your hands on, what I would suggest is that you can check out one of the other Chindet painting guides I've done, because the Vallejo colors in there, of course, will work just fine on these other miniatures. You're not stuck to any one supplier if you fancy. And then for the hat itself, I'm going to use mid-battle dress. Now, I tend to find it easier to paint the hat band first, and then paint the hat around it. You'll notice that I am going to try and use a few of the colors from the British paint set, because I figure it tends to be easier for folks to pick up the whole set, and it might as well make it worth it. So let's see what we can do with this stuff. Now, for his webbing, we've got a couple of options. What I'm going to use here is webbing green from the historical set. Now, anecdotally, I've heard that some of these guys were actually soaking and painting their webbing with like truck paint and stuff like that, which plausible, but I didn't find an awful lot to back that up. All the same, as time went on, they were making sure that their webbing was green and it was being dyed rather than just blancoed. Now, for things like rifle slings and what have you, I'm going to use webbing khaki. You could also use this, funnily enough, for the webbing. This is just a little more yellow. Now, again, looking to get the most utility out of that British paint set, what I have is rifle brown, but I'm not going to use it on the rifle. It's a little bit red and warm, and I actually prefer it, personally, for leather details. So the strap on this guy's slouch hat, and I recognize now that I have built a Gurkha with no kukri. So if you've got the little leather pouch, or scabbard rather, that the kukri is hanging from his belt with, then I would paint that with this as well. Then with mud spatter, I'm going to go ahead and paint in the rifle and any other wooden details. So as well as this, it's also going to be the little bit of entrenching tool handle on the back of his pack here. We get into the home stretch with these base coats. What I have is matte black, and I'm going to paint this over all of the, funnily enough, black parts and metal bits. So don't forget things like his bayonet scabbard down here, his boots, and little bits at the head of his entrenching tool and what have you. Now, a wee touch of gunmetal on the bayonet itself will do the job. These things were fearsome. And then one last detail, which at this point is really purely optional. I have some Brainmatter beige, and I'm going to paint in the undershirt he's wearing. And I'll also pop a little bit of this across his teeth. Easier to do off camera. Now to go ahead and wash him. Now what I've mixed up here, this is half and half strong tone and speed paint medium. Reason being is that I want this to get into all the nooks and crannies, give me plenty of shading, but I don't want it to stain the flatter areas of color if I can avoid it. And the speed paint medium is going to help thin out that wash and make that a little bit easier. You can use this completely neat if you fancy. Just if you do, go slow as you apply it, take your time, and make sure you're not letting it clump up in big wet patches anywhere. But otherwise, the way that I've done this, we can just go over everything, make sure we're getting it into all the little nooks and crannies, and once he is completely doused in this stuff, we'll find him somewhere warm to sit and dry, and that is not going to be a challenge at the moment, and leave him for about half an hour. We'll see what we get once this shade has dried. Now when that's dried, you should have something that looks like this. And you'll see, because we've thinned down that wash a little bit, we don't end up with it staining the colors all that much. So they're still quite close to what we painted on originally. Now you'll find that quite a few washes, because of the medium that they use in order to flow into all of the recesses, will have a bit of a shine to them. Now when you're painting your guys at home, from here what I'd suggest would be to do your highlights, add your decals and what have you, and then varnish as a final step. But because I'm recording under bright lights, it's going to make that a little bit difficult to see what we're doing. So I'm going to take him outside and hit him with a matte varnish straight away. Now I actually quite like that finish. It's a good way of demonstrating that from here, honestly, you could just base him up and put him on the table. An army like this, which is just solid colors and then a thinned out wash, will look fine en masse. But, of course, we'll take it a little bit further, because sometimes you're going to want to, but it doesn't need to be a slog to paint an army. So to start with some highlights, what I have is buffed hide. And this is going to be our first skin highlight. The reason why I'm using the Ruddy Browns range is that they are brown, funnily enough, but still with enough warmth that they don't look totally alien on a skin tone. So just a few lines of this to brighten up parts of his arm, and of course his face too. This is a little bit trickier, but I tend to find if you want to do this quickly, just nose and a little L shape on the cheeks will be plenty. Now personally, I can never quite figure out how to highlight the backs of arms, so I do recommend check out the product page for these guys, because there's some quite good examples there. What I've got finally is a 50-50 mix. This is Dorado's skin with our buffed hide. I'm just going to pop this on the back of his knuckles and on his very tip of his nose. This step, of course, again, we're getting into the purely optional stage here, but just to make it look a little bit more three-dimensional, a wee bit of this won't hurt. Now, moving on, I've got some grotesque green, and as well as having a wonderful name, it's a nice, bright, faded sort of olive green. This we're going to go over a shirt with, and it's just worth pointing out at this stage that if you're not worried about mixing your paints, what you can do is to pop a little bit of Brainmatter Beige into most of our base coats for this guy, and they'll make a fine highlight color. Some folks get a little bit tetchy about, oh, well, if I mix them, it's not going to be the same color every time. Well, yeah, but half and half is not too difficult to mix. And as we've established, your uniform colors really don't need to be the same all the time anyway, so try mixing up some of your highlights. So to put my money where my mouth is, here's that webbing green we used for his webbing, and I'm going to put a dot of this onto my palette. And then some Brainmatter Beige. Now the trick is here, don't just pop them straight on top of each other, because then you've got no control over what your actual mix is going to look like. Grab a brush that you're not actually going to paint with, get a little bit of the dollop there, and start mixing it in at the edge of your green. And once you're satisfied with how light that's going to be, you can start getting a little bit more aggro with it. And I think that's going to work fine for our highlights. So I'll just dab a little bit of water in there to keep that thin while I'm working. And then on his webbing, away we go. Now generally it's a good idea to start with a slightly darker color than you think you're going to need, because you can always add more Brainmatter Beige or ivory or whatever you're using. It's a bit of practice, and I've generally got a pretty good eye for it now. But if you're doing this for the first time, just start with less of your mix-in color. And if you find it's not really making enough of a highlight, you can just add more of the lighter color. So let's go over his webbing now. And as well, I've hit the yellow with that same trick. Now, that'll work really quite nicely. But for his trousers, I'm going to go back to a pre-mixed bottle. I have here camouflage green, and these are pretty fun to highlight if you're into this stage of the painting process, honestly, because there's so many little creases and folds. But at this point, as always, feel free to stop. I'm just enjoying this part. As well as his trousers, I did get a little bit keen, and off-screen I mixed some Brainmatter Beige into the two battle dress colors for his hat, just to add a couple of lines of highlight to that. Not strictly necessary, but like I said, I was enjoying it. Now the last thing to do here is to varnish him. So if you haven't already, go ahead, take him outside, hit him with the spray varnish, because now what I'm going to do is this little pencil. This is a 2B, or is it a B? It's a B, or a 2B will work as well. And we're going to just buff the edge of the pencil onto our black metalwork for the rifle. Now this works because the varnish introduces a slightly roughened edge to where it lands. It's diffusing the light by basically making things rougher. So what it means is that our little bit of pencil here will scratch along that, pick that up, and look quite compelling. Folks do ask, oh, well, if I do this now, do I have to varnish over the top to seal the pencil? Short answer is no. This'll weather handling for quite a while, and if it does eventually buff off, I just grab a pencil again. What I'm going to do from here is to go ahead and base them up. Recipe for that will be in the description. Let's get a look at our finished Gurkha. And so, there at last, our Gurkha is complete. Now, I've had a lot of fun painting him, and it's worth having a look around at some of the sheer variety of uniforms that you can have for these guys, because you may find a look that you like more, you may find a method which is faster. Now, on that note, I am going to link in the description to a painting guide for the Gurkhas by Painting Panzers, who also does work with a lot of bolt-action figures. Definitely worth checking out his channel, and he has done Gurkhas recently as well, with a more khaki-looking uniform. Well worth having a look at. So thanks as always goes to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, which includes my gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. If you've got any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram are both linked in there too. So, thank you for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.